perhaps tens of thousands of families, relatives, everyone.
Well, because we do talk about the numbers, because of the scale of it, it's natural to do so, but you're quite right. I mean, it's a human toll, and that says it, doesn't it?
And people all around the country want to know what is going on in this story, the latest news. That's why so many people are watching right now in the middle of the night in the United States, and we want to keep you updated with our coverage of America's new war. The work is slow and tedious, but workers continue to dig away at the massive mounds of debris that have been left by the collapse of New York's Twin Towers. Anything that might yield evidence is being sent to a joint task force for review.
Searchers at last make a key find in Pennsylvania, the cockpit voice recorder from the downed United 757. It may yield clues to the plane's final moments. And the House has joined the Senate in giving President George W. Bush new power to wage war. The measure allows Mr. Bush to use force against whoever is deemed responsible for the hijackings. Congress is also appropriating $40 billion for recovery and military efforts. Well, one branch of the investigation into Tuesday's attacks led authorities to Hamburg, Germany, where German police have searched 4 apartments at the request of the FBI. Bettina Luscher has more.
Technical University Hamburg-Harburg, a campus where German prosecutors say 2 of the alleged hijackers studied. Mohammed Atta is believed to have studied here for 8 years under the name of Mohammed El Amir. A professor still cannot believe his former student could have been a terrorist.
Mohammed El
Amir was an extremely nice, very religious, helpful, active student, says Professor Dietmar Machule. There was no indication that he would be involved in such a horrible crime. Professor Machule teaches urban planning, and the student in question wrote his thesis for him in 1999. There's a strong similarity to the photo in the media, but I have to say I'm not totally certain. Mohammed Atta started an Islamic prayer group at the university.
The Islamic group was founded by him. He was a founder, and they had received a praying room from the ASTA, which is the Students' Union.
That group has now been shut down, and the prayer room sealed by authorities. The second student whom authorities believe was aboard the hijacked plane is Marwan Al-Sheri, who was enrolled here from October 1999 until September 2000.
I think we did never seen him in the lectures, and even as we tried to send him his documents, we couldn't reach him.
A third student is believed to have been part of an alleged terrorist group here in Hamburg, but German authorities have released few details. For students and professors, the accusations have come as a shock. There were people who started crying when they saw Mohammed. Bettina Luscher, CNN, Hamburg.
And people wondering what shape the fight against those responsible, the response, the retaliation, whatever words you choose, against those responsible for the attacks. People saying it most likely will be more than a military undertaking. Analysts saying that it could be a concerted effort to weed out the shadowy groups that may have been involved. Well, counterterrorism expert Lee Weavers joins us now from London with more on this. Mr. Weavers, thanks so much for being here. You know, a lot of people are saying that this has to be several groups. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's always very difficult to define exactly which organisation is working with the other terrorist organisation at any one time. I think it's likely in these circumstances that there is an alliance of groups, and certainly when you look at what has occurred and the suspicions that we still have, that there are a number of groups or terrorists still awaiting perhaps the opportunity to launch further attacks. I think we have to keep a very open mind as to precisely who will be cooperating with whom.
And when you say there's a chance of further attacks, what sort of form do you think those would take? I mean, is there any chance that this group or these groups would try to use the same tactics twice?
I think that's probably unlikely. The essence of a terrorist attack, of course, is based upon the element of surprise. And in these circumstances, very many measures have now been put in place. I suspect, though, that there may be opportunities in other areas that could be exploited. At the same time, it's likely, we think, from our analysis, that the probable position at this time is that the terrorists will await a response, first of all, to these last attacks.
Well, and what are the risks inherent in a response? I mean, if the U.S. and whatever coalition it builds decides to go ahead and use force, does that only guarantee more retaliation from the terrorists?
Well, I think, and you mentioned earlier that the response would come from more than one area. I think any form of response will need to be balanced, and it would almost certainly involve a number of countries. I also feel quite strongly that this will require not just a military response. This, as I believe one of your leaders has already mentioned, is likely to be a campaign over a lengthy period. And our experience, certainly in the UK, has taught us that we need to use every opportunity, develop good intelligence capabilities, and ensure that we have a good frontline capability in trying to ensure that we can not only respond to any attack that takes place on ourselves, but that we're also capable of reacting in a proportionate and legitimate way in order to firstly identify evidence and secondly bring those responsible to justice.
Well, you know, and there's a lot of debate about how best that would be done. Is it necessary for intelligence to actually infiltrate these groups, get dirty, as people are saying, in a way that perhaps the international community hasn't been willing to in the past?
Well, I think that's highly problematical because of the nature of the groups. Infiltration is an extremely difficult thing to effect. It's more likely that using intelligence sources of our own and really trying to improve our capacity, not just in any one country, but across the world, that we're likely to be more effective. The lesson certainly from the UK is that we have become, and we've been forced to become, far better coordinated in the last 15 to 20 years, and we now act very much as one integrated body. Now, we are unfortunately one of the leading nations in this sense. Many others have lots of disparate agencies working in particular areas of their own. And I think probably the biggest opportunity here is for us all to integrate our capability, thereby ensuring that we do maximise both our intelligence capability and the ability to monitor those who are plotting attacks of this type.
You know, my colleague Jim Clancy and I were talking just a short while ago about a question we don't hear being asked, and that is in terms of preventing these attacks in the future, how important is it for the international community to try to help get the conflict in the Middle East resolved?
Well, I think when we look at the political developments of recent years and the general scenario that exists around the world, terrorism generally emanates from places where there are conflicts, disagreements, and large disaffected groups. I think in the longer term, no matter what law enforcers and security agencies do, we have to look at this wider picture and consider what can be done from a policy standpoint to try and actually remove the root cause.
Lee Weavers, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Lee Weavers joining us from London. Jim.
Interesting interview. Well, Congress showing a united front in granting President Bush the authority to retaliate against terrorism, but as Jonathan Karl tells us, some lawmakers still have concerns about just how far those powers should go.
With virtually no dissent, Congress authorized the president to use all necessary and appropriate force against all those tied to the attacks.
For constitutional purposes, it's the same as a declaration of war. There is no constitutional difference between authorizing the president to use this kind of force and saying we declare war.
The hurried vote united conservatives and liberals who usually disagree about military intervention. Paul Wellstone, whose first significant vote as a senator a decade ago was against the use of force against Iraq in the Persian Gulf War, was one of the few to speak before the vote.
It's going to be a long, difficult struggle, but I believe people in our country and people in Minnesota are united in this. but we need to do this the smart way.
Despite the lack of debate, members of both parties had privately objected to a White House request for a more open-ended authorization of force against terrorists. As a result, the resolution passed authorizes the president to use military action specifically, quote, against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons.
It relates to the incident, and there's broad authority relating to the incident. It does not relate to all terrorism every place.
Several key leaders hope to avoid a repeat of the 1964 Tonkin Gulf Resolution, in which Congress, after North Vietnam allegedly attacked U.S. warships, almost unanimously granted President Johnson the authority, quote, to take all necessary measures to prevent further aggression by North Vietnam. Many in Congress came to regret that as the Vietnam War escalated and grew increasingly unpopular. While only Congress has the power to declare war, the president, under the Constitution, has the power to repel invasion. And if a war drags on, Congress, with its power of the purse, can ultimately bring an end to it by refusing to pay for it. Jonathan Karl, CNN, Capitol Hill.
U.S. officials say Osama bin Laden is the prime suspect behind these terrorist attacks. But as David Inser tells us, getting at the suspect may be more complicated than it appears.
The nation is angry about thousands of innocent deaths. U.S. officials say the evidence so far points to Osama bin Laden's group, and the Bush administration is talking tough.
We will go after that group, that network, and those who have harbored, supported, and aided that network to rip the network up. And when we're through with that network, we will continue with a global assault against terrorism in general.
But if it is bin Laden, how to get at him and his top lieutenants? Some argue for giving Afghanistan's Taliban government an ultimatum: turn him over or else.
We know where your ministries are, we know where your houses are. We're simply going to obliterate them from the face of the planet.
Bouncing that rubble with a lot of B-52 loads of bombs, I don't think is going to change Afghanistan all that much.
No, say most analysts in and out of government. If you want to roll up bin Laden and al-Qaeda, it is going to take more than bombs. It will take ground troops.
In order for us to preserve America and our way of life, we're going to have to sacrifice American treasure and, unfortunately, in some cases, perhaps some American blood.
It is not just a question of grabbing or killing one man or even 20. There are a dozen or more training camps, U.S. intelligence says, producing more terrorists dedicated to killing Americans.
Revenge alone is not an answer. There has to be a complete eradication and elimination of all the training camps.
And much of bin Laden's base of support is in neighboring Pakistan, through which money from around the Arab world is funneled to the al-Qaeda coffers. It is a treacherous and dangerous area indeed.
If you start moving in ground troops and you're willing to occupy countries for long periods of time, you do change things rather significantly for terrorists. I'm not sure this country is ready to do that, even if it does have a fit of passion right now, and it may or may not make sense for the U.S. to do that in its larger interests.
David Ensor, CNN, Washington.
More streets of Lower Manhattan are going to be reopening in the coming hours, but at the site at the World Trade Center, rescue operators are very much still underway. For the past few days, Gary Cutley has been updating us from New York. Let's join him once again now. Eric.
Thank you, Jim. As you know, we're into the first weekend here in New York City following last Tuesday's, what do we want to call it, grotesqueness and tragedy. And New Yorkers, of course, like people elsewhere, have to decide, what am I going to do this weekend? Well, do I go to a baseball game? No, there's no baseball game. They've been canceled. Go to a pro football game, the NFL on Sunday? No, they've been canceled too. Maybe go to a movie. But who needs to see an action movie with cars and buildings exploding? Well, then go to a comedy. But are we really ready to laugh yet? Well, we're running short of possibilities now, but there is one new destination in Manhattan that a number of people are going to visit and spend some time there. And our Jody Ross is live on the location to tell us why they're going there. Hi, Jody.
Hi, Garrick. They are coming here to register names of missing persons and family members. And this is also a place, sort of a gathering spot for people now who are trying to find some comfort and solace. The armory behind me actually closed tonight at midnight, but the Salvation Army will provide food and supplies throughout the night. And the crowds of people looking for these missing family members and friends have, of course, dispersed at this late hour. But earlier tonight, we heard another story. This one from Hassan Chowdhury, a man looking for his friend whose wife just gave birth to a baby boy. What's the hardest part for you, Hassan, day to day, not knowing where he is?